This is Tom Rankin for Chris Mays from the Attorney General's office. I'll be acting chair today. So we'll call the meeting to order. And why don't we proceed with roll call?
Jean Bishop.
Bishop.
Thank you. Chris Mays.
Tom Rankin for Chris Mays.
Thank you. Jeffrey Glover.
David Bird for Colonel Glover.
Thank you. Russ Skinner.
James McFarland here for Russ Skinner.
Thank you. Kara Riley. We have a quorum, sir.
All right, thank you very much. We'll go forward then. We've got a couple action items on the agenda today. One of the first things we need to do is review and approve the previous meetings minutes. So those have been provided in the agenda materials today. So why don't we go ahead and have people review that, and upon that happening or at any time, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
David Bird, motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Jean Bishop, second.
Okay, we have a second. But why don't we just do a voice vote then? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it, so the meetings are approved. All right, the next item on the agenda is the fiscal 25 Drug Gang Violent Crime Control Program Cycle 38 Grant Awards. And we're going to have a presentation by Mr. Vidali.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Appreciate your participation in the meeting. Item number 3 is a recommendation from staff to the Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Committee to recommend to the full commission the award of the 2025 Arizona Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Cycle 38 grant funds as displayed in Table DC4 of the agenda to eligible criminal justice agencies for the period beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025, except the Attorney General's Office Medicaid Fraud Project, which will be funded from October 1st, 2024 and end September 30th, 2025. I'll explain that as part of my presentation. Staff is recommending a total award of $8,675,483.32. Under the proposal, $2,953,047.25 would be allocated to apprehension projects. $3,298,988.19 for prosecution projects, $637,429 for the statewide forfeiture project, $449,551.88 for forensic support projects, and $1,336,467 for a drug apprehension project. The total grant funding is comprised of $3,764,904 from the Burn Justice Assistance Grant, $2,767,208.49 from the Drug Enforcement Fund, and then finally $2,143,370.83 in local match funds. This recommendation would support $5,220,317.20 in personal services, $2,333,341.91 in employee-related expenditures, $151,304 in overtime expenditures, and $973,520.21 in professional and outside services. In the agenda, I have a table DC2 that shows you the program size from fiscal year 2024, this current fiscal year, to the recommended fiscal year 2025. The 3 fund sources are listed in the table, and the corresponding changes in each one of those fund sources going from 2024 to 2025. Each of those fund sources would experience a decline. which means a decline in the total program size of $309,586.45. And I'll show you where that decline is happening, and how we're able to keep projects level that are part of the recommendation. As far as applications go, we had 30 applications submitted. The period of application was January 29th and closed on February 23rd. Of the 30 applications, 11 were apprehension projects, 15 were prosecution, 1 was a statewide forfeiture project, 2 were forensic support projects, and we had 1 drug adjudication project. All the applications were reviewed by an evaluation team and scored based on the criteria published in the solicitation. And I would note that the recommendation has some additional considerations that we have to take into account. Number one, I mentioned earlier the Attorney General Medicaid fraud project with a different performance period. That's the October 1st, 2024 through September 30th, 2025. That project is actually providing matching funds for a federal grant. The grant period needs to run concurrently with the federal fiscal year, and so that's why it's different. And that's why it's all state funds that are allocated under that project. All the other projects would have a performance period of July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. We also have to comply with some allocation limits in ARS 412402. That sets out the basically distribution limits for the drug and gang enforcement account. And those limits are 50% possible total allocation for law enforcement agencies, 50% for prosecution programs, up to 30% for court programs, up to 30% for corrections agencies, and up to 30% for criminal justice records integration. That's not a sum total. That's just the total amount of the pot of money that we could allocate to those types of agencies. The recommendation also has to comply with some federal requirements. One of those is the Burn Justice Assistance Grant variable pass-through. That's set by the federal government at 72.4% for Arizona. This recommendation would pass through 83.3%. Typically, that is the way our recommendations have gone. We've typically allocated more than the required variable pass-through to our local criminal justice partners. And then finally, there's a requirement called the less than $10,000 jurisdictions. What that is a requirement from BJA and their formula that if a local jurisdiction, if their allocation for the Burn Justice Assistance Grant calculated out to be $10,000 or less, they will not grant that money directly to that jurisdiction. And so what BJA does is they add up all of the amounts from those jurisdictions and they send it to the Criminal Justice Commission as the state administering agency of the grant. And then we have 2 options. We can grant out the money directly to those small jurisdictions, or we can allocate it all to a state police agency. We only have one to choose from that provides a statewide benefit. And so historically, that has been the one the commission has chosen. Very good reasons for doing that. Some of those amounts in the less than 10,000 jurisdictions might be an amount that is meaningful to that small jurisdiction, but the vast majority would not be. You see amounts like $83 or $120. And obviously the administrative requirements for a federal grant far exceed the amount that we would send to those jurisdictions. And that's really the basis of why the commission historically has chosen to allocate the money to the Department of Public Safety. That amount for this grant year is $202,929. And you'll see in the recommendation, we allocate at least that much in federal funds to the Department of Public Safety's approved project. Let me walk you through the recommendation and point out where there have been some meaningful subtractions or additions. And so I had mentioned that this is about $309,000 less for 2025 than 2024. Where that is happening is we have a couple we have 3 projects that received a grant in 2024 that did not apply. They did not open up an application and submit an application for 2025. Those were the Pinal County Sheriff's Office. That was about $153,000. The Navajo County Attorney's Office was about $135,000. And then Pinal County Sheriff's Office also had more of a one-time forensics project for $14,800 that they did not, obviously, because it was one time, submit an application for 2025. And then 2 other reductions that occurred. They're self-imposed reductions. We had a couple agencies that gave themselves a reduction, if you will. They applied for less money in 2025 than they received in 2024 for this grant. And that was the Apache County Sheriff's Office and then the La Paz County Attorney's Office. We did add one new project. The Salt River Pima Maricopa Police Department put in an application that we do include on our recommendation. You'll see that in the recommendation for $67,485.60. Salt River Pima was a grantee of ours, not last fiscal year, but the fiscal year before, and maybe even the fiscal year before that. And then last fiscal year, they just, for whatever reason, didn't put in an application. And then for 2025, they applied again. And so we included them in the recommendation. The sum total of those changes comes up to our $309,586.45. Just a quick note on the requests that we got in. Total requests were about $15,700,000. That was a little bit less than the previous grant that we did for 2024, but it is pretty much in line with past years' requests for resources from this grant. That the agencies seem to remain in the high 14 million, low 16 million range, and so this year was no different. Was no surprise. The majority of the funding requests came from personnel by way of salary, ERE in particular. Also, if you add in professional outside services for this grant is really personnel. It's personnel from task forces that participate but aren't the grantee. We have to pay them through the contracting line. And so the vast majority of the requests were for people. We have the recommendation. It's table DC4. That would be the table that you would reference in any motion. That lays out the federal fund allocation, the state fund allocation, and then the match allocation for each one of the recommended projects. Of note, you'll see the AG's Medicaid fraud project. There is no money allocated in the federal line because it's a match to a federal grant. The Administrative Office of the Courts, we typically have funded out of all state funds. What's happening with that project is AOC gets an allocation of money from us, and then they run it through a grant process that they've established over the years, and that money is going to primarily to county probation departments, and so they get requests from them and come up with an allocation plan, and so. It's easier for us to just allocate all state money. And then you'll see the Department of Public Safety's allocation. We're allocating in federal funds $252,930, which exceeds that less than 10,000 amount of 202,000. So we meet the requirements set in statute and the federal grant for this for this recommendation. And then finally, I would note, we try and keep an eye on what money goes into each individual county and then all statewide projects between the current fiscal year and then the recommended year. And that's table DC5 in the agenda. What's of note is essentially you have shifts in the piece of pie that are going into each county. All of the counties are receiving a higher percentage in 2025 of the amount of money available than they received in 2024, with two exceptions, Apache County and Pinal County. And of note, those are two that either self-cut or did not submit a project to be considered. Other than that, every other allocation is increasing in percentage from 2024 to 2025. Now, we'd like that to happen in addition to having more money available, but state money coming in through the DEA fund has not been particularly healthy. We've seen steady declines for years in this program. Medical marijuana, it appears, has accelerated that decline. That's why you see the reduction in our allocation of roughly 132,000 going from 24 to 25. And then you see that decline in the federal grant of about $100,000. That is not very significant when we look at changes in the burn grant from year to year. Between 100 and 200,000 is typically what we experience on either side, either getting more of a grant to the tune of 100 or 200,000, or getting a little less, and that's based on a formula that BJS creates and manages that results in funding changes in any particular state. I would note too that we do get penalized every year for the it's called the SORNA penalty, Sex Offender Registration Notification Act. It's a 10% penalty if we don't meet the requirements of SORNA. That's the Adam Walsh Act. The Bureau of Justice Assistance evaluates whether we meet that requirement each grant year. They determine that we don't, and they penalize us. That's about $135,000 to $140,000 on average that we experience a hit on every year. So unfortunately, if we complied with SORNA, we wouldn't have a $99,000 reduction in our burn grant that we're dealing with. But that's the name of that game. The other penalty that we're susceptible to is the PREA penalty. That was not imposed for this particular grant year. That's a 5% penalty. So I'm appreciative certainly of that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I am available for questions on this recommendation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vidale. Do any members have any questions for Mr. Vidale? Hearing none. Any discussion on the recommended action by any members? Hearing none, I will accept a motion for the recommended action, perhaps just by reading what the action is on section 3 of the agenda. Do I have a motion? We're going to need somebody. Anybody willing to make the motion on section 3 of the agenda? Don't be bashful. Maybe we could.
Jean Bishop, I'll make that on the form of a motion relating to section 3 on the agenda.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll read what that recommended action for the record. It says, Drug and Gang Violent Crime Control Committee recommends to the Commission the award of the FY 2025 Arizona Drug Gang and Violent Crime Control Cycle 38 grant funds as displayed in Table DC4 of the agenda to eligible criminal justice agencies for the period beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025, except for the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Project, which will be funded from October 1st, 2024 and end September 30th, 2025.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vidale. Having a motion, do we have a second?
David, second.
We have a second. So we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor of the recommended action, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. The recommended action is passed. So we'll move on to the next section of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, members, item number 4 is a staff recommendation that the Drug Gang and Violent Crime Control Committee recommends to the Commission the award of $2,788,060.89 in federal and local match cash funds for the fiscal year 2025 Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Grant Program beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025, as displayed in Table DC7 of the agenda. The proposed award would utilize $2,091,045.67 from the Federal Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Grant and $697,015.22 from local match funds. This federal grant requires a 25%, Siani? 25, thank you. A 25% local match. The recommendation would fund prior year projects from the Arizona Department of Corrections, the Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, and then Chicanos por la Causa as part of the recommendation. And then it would add new projects. And I would note, Mr. Chairman, members, we've struggled for a number of years to have any new projects come forward for this particular grant. We've had a number of years where we were getting substantial grant awards from BJA for RSAT, and the projects that applied were only the projects that applied the previous year. We had these 4. We may have had another one several years ago that stuck with us for a period of time and then dropped off, but these 4 have been mainstays, and their expenditures really have been stable. They haven't demanded more. And so we were building up more of a fund balance, it becomes a money management challenge. These grants last a 4-year period, and then you have a year no cost extension if approved by BJA, and then you lose the money. And so we undertook an effort many years ago to try and bring some agencies on board. Ashley Mully, who is the primary coordinator for this program, really tried hard to reach out to agencies that particular sheriff's offices that did not have a residential substance abuse program, to try and educate them on the program and get them to apply for these funds. We struggled, and this year we're not struggling. This is really good. So we have new projects that applied that are part of the recommendation. And thanks in large part to Ashley's work. So we have, as part of the recommendation, the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, the Navajo County Sheriff's Office, Graham County Substance Abuse Coalition, and the Valley Housing Partners as part of our recommendation. We did have one other nonprofit that applied. It was the Social Purpose Corrections, that we did not include in our recommendation because what they were asking for was not in alignment with the guidelines under the Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Program. And so we did not include them in our recommendation. The RSAT program, as part of the federal grant guidelines, requires that at least 10% of the grant go to a local corrections or detention facilities. If we didn't have enough applicants from that type of an agency, then you can allocate it anywhere. But if you do, you need to make sure that your recommendation includes at least 10% of any one grant year to those particular agencies. This recommendation would comply with that. The RSAT program has 3 different areas that we can fund under our application. A residential program, which is 6 to 12 months. So we're really talking the Department of Corrections. Jail-based programs that have to be at least 3 months in length. And then post-release treatment programs. And that can be a number of different kinds of programs that happen outside of the jail setting. Our recommendation is in table DC7. It would be for a total of $2,788,060.89. $2,091,045.61 would be from the federal grant, and $697,015.22 would be local match. How we're funding this is based on a table we have, table DC6 in the agenda. And what we did there is lay out the amount of funding we have available for each of the federal grants that are active. So we have 2022, 2021, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 grants available. The total amount for those 4 grants is $3,599,893. I want to stress that's just the federal money available. That's not program size. Program size would be federal grant plus the match amount. There's a section in there that we have proposed for the FY 2025 program size. That includes the federal amount of money we want to spend and the local match for the total program size. And so that amount reads $2,091,045.67 that we would use in federal money. The $697,015.22 would be provided through local match. That makes the total program size the $2.7 million program size. And what does that mean for future projects? Well, if we take the $3.6 roughly million and subtract out the $2 million, $2.1 million roughly that we're going to spend in federal grant funds, that will leave us with roughly $1,508,847.33 for the next fiscal year, which would be the 2026 fiscal year. And then I'll make a note that we still have not applied for the FY 2024 RSAT grant. That will be coming up. We'll apply for that. My sense is that we won't get as large an allocation, but I think we'll get a fairly decent amount because this is still an area that's important to this administration, as it was the prior year or the prior administration. So my expectation is that it's a little bit less, but I think we'll be in the neighborhood of $2 million, maybe a little over $2 million available in federal money to use for the FY 26 grant. Now, that also means that we're going to have to scale down. And so the plan is to review what data we're collecting from these projects and then use that to support requests either to the legislature or to County Board of Supervisors to show the effectiveness of these RSAT programs, and in particular, if we lower instances of substance use and related recidivism rates, that there's actually a cost savings to our counties and to the state. And so that's what our approach will be, but we will have to scale down. But that's probably a good problem to have. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vidale. Any questions by members for Mr. Vidale? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Let me ask this, Mr. Vidale, could you read the recommended action before the committee?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. The recommended action is the Drug Gang and Violent Crime Control Committee recommends to the commission the award of $2,788,060.89 in federal and local cash match funds for the fiscal year 2025 Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Grant Program, beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025, as displayed in Table DC7 of the agenda.
All right, thank you. Any discussion on the recommended action? Hearing none, I'll accept a motion for the committee to approve the recommended action as read by Mr. Vidale. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, motion by David to adopt the recommended action for Mr. Vidal.
Do we have a second?
James McFarland, I'll second.
All right, thank you. We'll do a voice vote again. All members in favor of recommending the action as read and the motion, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? None opposed. The recommended action is passed. Any other matters of discussion or agenda items?
Mr. Chairman, under item 6, we have a call to the public, and I have no one that has emailed us wishing to speak.
All right. Have we received any other communication, email or anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, no.
All right. And I'm noting there are no members of the public present in the meeting room. So there being no members of the public, we'll move on to the next matter. So the next matter is the next meeting. My understanding is that'll be to call to the chair. So with that, I guess that would conclude our meeting and we can adjourn. So thanks to all the members for appearing today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, members.
Meeting's adjourned.